Dear Biker, I've got a story to share. One that my grandfather used to tell us when we were just kids. He was a veteran of both World War II and the Korean War, so he had seen a lot in his lifetime, but this story always stood out to me, and I've always believed it. You see, my grandfather, he grew up in West Virginia. Back in his younger years, he and his brother were moonshiners, running liquor through the mountains. One night, as he told it, they were crossing the New River when they came face to face with something terrifying. On the bank there stood a big, black creature. At first it was on two legs, towering over them, but then, as my grandfather described it, suddenly stooped down and dropped onto all fours, running at them like something wild and feral. It chased them all the way to their truck. When it finally reached them, it ripped the truck door open and grabbed my grandfather by the arm, yanking so hard that it tore his arm right out of the socket. His brother pulled out a .357 revolver and fired, shooting the creature off the truck. Somehow, they managed to drive away. My grandfather told this story the same way every single time. He never once changed a single detail. Well, he passed away about a year ago. But not long before that, I took him to see that movie, The Wolfman. During one scene, when the creature transformed, standing on two legs before dropping to all fours and chasing people, he nudged me and whispered, "Ben, that's exactly what I saw that night." I'll never forget that moment, or his story. Thanks for letting me share this with you, Biker. Signed, Ben. Dear Tattooed Biker, back on May 10th at about 1:30 in the morning, my son and I were in the driveway of my home in Vernal, Utah. We were installing a stereo in my Durango when we heard coyotes in the field across the street. A very large pack of them from the sound of it, and they had started feeding their kids. And that's when we heard several strange howls, and these weren't coyotes. These were deep, unnatural sounds, unlike anything I've ever heard. Well, the coyotes began hooting back and forth, and then suddenly all hell broke loose. Whatever was howling suddenly attacked them. The screams of the coyotes being torn apart filled the air, so loud and violent that it was terrifying to listen to. When it was finally over, my neighbor came outside and asked what in the world that noise had been. Well, we told him that we had no idea, only that something had just attacked the coyotes. For a moment, we thought about going into the woods to see, but honestly, the fear was just too overwhelming. And instead, we hurried back inside. Well, the very next evening, it was raining heavy. I had a few friends over and told them about what my son and I had heard. We stepped outside so I could point out the spot in the field where it happened. And that's when we saw them. Red, glowing eyes, staring back at us from the darkness. I shined a laser pointer at them, and then, behind the first pair of eyes, more appeared. 4, then 6, until several sets of eyes glowed in the night. The first one, well, it never moved. It just stood perfectly still, staring back at us. But the others began to frolic, almost playfully, leaping around one another, and then 2 suddenly broke away on each side, slowly moving along the edges of the field. And that's when it hit me. They were trying to flank us, to surround us. We bolted back inside the house. For hours that night, whenever we shined a spotlight out the window, they were still there, those same red eyes just watching us. By morning, they were all gone. We checked the field, but there was no footprints, no evidence at all, even though it had been raining all night. We estimated the height of the eyes, and every one of them had been about 8 feet off the ground. After that, strange things kept happening. I started seeing orbs floating in the sky above my home. One night, my son, a friend, and we witnessed a craft flashing with lights land in the mountains just above the house. Ever since, I haven't been able to shake the fear. My dogs on several occasions have run into the house shaking and whimpering, refusing to go back outside. Another night, I heard what sounded like enormous wings, a swooshing rush of air followed by a jet-like explosion that tore through my yard. Even stranger, a large tree in my backyard that had fallen south was suddenly upright again, but turned completely around, facing the opposite direction. There were no markings, no sign of it being moved. It had simply been picked up, rotated, and then set back down. Now I live in constant fear. Some days I can't even bring myself to leave my house. I don't know what's out there surrounding my home and my life, but whatever it is, it feels like it's only getting worse. I'll keep you posted if anything else happens. Signed, Hank. Dear TB, I'd like to share something that happened to me when I was about 13 or 14 years old. At the time, I was living in Midland, Texas. My friends and I used to ride our motorcycles out there in the desert just outside of town. And, well, one day we came across something I still struggle to describe. I remember seeing this creature. It was probably about 2 feet tall when it stood up on its back legs. At first glance, it reminded me of a little dinosaur. But what stood out was its arms. It didn't have fingers like you'd normally see in a movie depiction of a T-Rex with 3 or 4 claws. This thing only had 1 claw on each arm. The skin was a greenish yellow color, and when it reared up, I noticed its head. It had this strange, egg-shaped dome for a face. The closest thing I can compare it to was a miniature T-Rex, but warped. Not quite right. There were 4 of us riding together that day. We'd been circling the area on our dirt bikes when we scared it. At first, it was crawling around the desert on all 4s, but as we got closer, it stood upright. Those tiny arms and the way it glared at us, it looked angry, almost like we had disturbed it in its territory. At the time, I just brushed it off. I assumed it was some kind of odd lizard, but the memory has stuck with me. Years later, I was listening to a caller or an Art Bell show, and they described seeing something almost exactly the same. And that's when I realized I hadn't imagined it. I don't know what it was we encountered out there in the desert, but it's something I'll never be able to forget. Signed, Elliot. Hey, Tattooed Biker. I decided to take my dogs for a walk one day on one of the trails near my house. I told my husband I wouldn't be gone long. I ended up at the Vanissart Woods Environmental Education Center. It was around 11:30 a.m. when we got there. Now the day was absolutely beautiful. Clear skies and no one else on the trails. Absolutely perfect walking conditions. I had my 2 female Alaskan Malamutes with me. This is important later. We started down the Green Trail, since it's the shortest loop and passes by some marshy bogs where the girls like to watch the ducks. For the first little bit, everything was normal. Birds chirping, wind in the trees, all the usual forest sounds. And that's when I heard something that made me stop cold. A voice. And not just a voice. This voice called out my name. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe somebody with a radio on another trail, but both of my dogs had their eyes locked in the same direction that the sound had come from. That's when an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. A moment later, I heard my name again. Louder this time, more insistent. I didn't look toward the sound. Instead, I looked at my dogs. The older female's hackles were slowly rising, and that was enough for me. It was time to go. We'd only walked maybe 10 minutes down the trail, so I decided to turn and head back. And that's when I heard my name again. So we picked up the pace. By now, both dogs had their hackles raised. My younger one was only 8 months old at the time, but even she was bristling with fear. And then I realized something chilling. My dogs weren't pulling me. Malamutes are bred to pull, and on walks they always strain at the leash, but now, both of them were just glued to my sides, one on the left and one on the right, moving stiffly in step with me. My older dog let out a low, constant growl as if warning something unseen out there to stay back. As we hurried down the trail we came in on, I spotted something that made my stomach sink. A large log was lying across the path, fresh, heavy, and wrong. I could even see my own shoe prints and the dog's paw prints in the mud going under where the log now rested. This hadn't been there before. We stepped reluctantly off the path and around it, my dogs clearly resisting. "Come on, Kiv. Come on, Echo," I urged them. They followed, but only just. We hustled back onto the trail, and that's when I heard it again. But this time, it wasn't my name. It was my voice, but it was Echo's name. My younger dog snapped her head back toward the sound. And then moments later, I heard Kiv. The voice was calling both of my dogs by name in my voice. We broke into a jog and then a run. Every hair on the back of my neck standing up. The voice, it called out my name again. Angrier this time. More desperate, almost. Like it didn't want us to leave. The faster we ran, the more frantic that it seemed. Finally, the trail opened to the parking lot. And then suddenly, I realized I could hear the birds again, and the wind through the trees. The normal sounds of the forest that I hadn't even realized had gone, completely silent. I loaded the dogs into the car as fast as I could, and we drove away without looking back. I don't know what that was, or if I somehow upset something. I didn't take anything, move anything, or touch anything. I always respect nature and make sure that my dogs do too. We even bring our own sticks so they don't pick up any from the park. All I know is that day, something in those woods knew my name and my dogs' names too. Signed, Helen. Hello, TB. Thanks for taking the time to read my email. I live in a recently built house in Magog, Quebec, about 1 kilometer west of Lake Magog. And near my property is a forest and a large marshy area, roughly 200 meters beyond my backyard. And I've lived here for 2 years, and many of my neighbors have been here the same length of time. Well, since June, we've been hearing loud snarling sounds coming from the marsh, mostly late at night. At first, I just assumed it was a coyote or some other wild canine, but recently I've noticed activity that rules that out entirely. One of my neighbors, 3 houses down, recently got a llama, which they kept in a large, railed pen out behind their house. This past weekend, the llama disappeared. The only evidence was drag marks leading from the pen toward the marsh. There were no tracks, no blood. The police came out to investigate, but found nothing. And then on Sunday night, I was cleaning up my greenhouse when I heard a loud thud behind my utility shed. Curious, I stepped outside, but then heard that snarling again, only this time much closer. I immediately went back inside the greenhouse. I turned off the lights and quietly watched. I called my wife, telling her to ensure that all the doors were locked. I sat down on a bench waiting. About 10 minutes later, the snarling returned. A security light on a timer above the back porch was shining toward the greenhouse, and another light by the driveway triggers if anything moves nearby. I heard movement near the utility shed again, followed by another thud and then a brief shriek. Suddenly, the driveway light came on, and there it was. This huge, winged creature with a long, thin tail. It was absolutely hideous. It had bat-like skin stretched across the wings, short horns atop a strange, snake-like head. At one point, it spread its wings, and I estimate the wingspan to be at least 8 meters. It stood roughly 3 to 4 meters high, snarling and thrashing as it ran toward the marsh. I just honestly can't compare it to any known animal. One of my neighbors ran out but didn't see it. I described what I had witnessed, and he looked shocked. We reported the incident to the police, but they didn't find anything. The next day, I contacted a zoologist in Montreal who referred me to a cryptozoologist in Sherbrooke. Neither offered much help or volunteered to examine the area. The only clue left behind in my yard was 4 dig marks, soil that for some reason looked deliberately overturned, as if by a shovel. I haven't heard any sound since that night. If you or any of your listeners have any idea what this could have been, please let me know. Signed, Martin.
He's got scars on his arms, flames on his chest, rides a steel horse, won't ever rest. Chasing whispers through the foggy pines, searching for truths that slip through time. Moonlight bends where he rolls, the shadows speak. They've got souls, inking shadows, leather and lore. He's knocking on the otherworld's door. Bigfoot's howl, dog man's glare, men in black just vanishing there.